and you think of Venmo and PayPal, that really drove a lot of behavior change with the banks because they had to react. They had to introduce their own technology, Zelle, to introduce peer-to-peer payments. And that transformed a lot of things. They kind of pushed, for example, the clearinghouse to support same-day ACH transfers and almost create these new technologies to support it. And it was because PayPal and Venmo were doing something that was crazy. They were willing to kind of take the burden and the risk of moving money instantaneously for their end users so that their end users could have a great experience. It seems like the same thing has been happening on the corporate side where there's this whole other ecosystem outside of the banks, not the banks, that came into play. So you mentioned Bill.com as just one example. They're not the only ones. There's a bunch of players that almost sit in between the bank and the customer. And the customer, all that they want to do is make a payment, right? They want to make a transfer of some kind, pay an invoice, to pay a vendor, whatever it might be, to receive, a payment, whatever it might be. And I'm sure that they wish that that could just be done natively, that they could just request that payment and get it, and it be put into their accounts. The problem, though, is that there's a level of controls, which you just mentioned, that is kind of inherently tied to this whole process. And that has to be a check in the box, that you have to be able to initiate these transfers and be able to validate and audit and control when and why payments happen. Okay, that makes sense. That's a software problem, though, right? Anyone should be able to solve that problem through a great user experience. The second part of this problem, though, is that once that's done, you would assume, okay, now give me my money, or now let me send you my money. Problem is that even that is fragmented. There are many ways that you could do it. You could do it via the traditional ACH route, right? 1 to 3 days. And that is based on a technology that is super old at this, we're talking about multiple decades worth of experience on those rails, and not much has changed other than maybe just recently this concept of instant ACH, but it's more consumer than it is corporate, I'd say. Then we have Wire, which has existed forever. Right? Not much has changed on that front. And then we have new things. RTP, Fed getting in the game and kind of introducing their own payments program. In Europe, they have their own kind of systems through PSD2. All around the world, there are all these different programs that are kind of bringing to the forefront, it's possible to do instant. You don't need to be PayPal to have that kind of technology. We've come up with it.
Well, there's some of it is just even the personas that you're dealing with too, because you've got essentially two institutions and then this gap that's widening. Right. And so, and the widening is caused by digitization. So you basically have the banks and then you have ERP systems, right? And that gap exists between the two, and that is growing because the new emergent aspect of kind of what's, driving in that wedge to make that gap even wider is really what's happened with e-commerce over the last 15, 20 years. E-commerce is really, you talk about like payments are getting into everything. Every business is turning into a payments company, and maybe not really. But the fact is business is done digitally so much now. And with the rise of e-commerce and what that's done is it's sort of brought this need for this operational money movement aspect that needs to be programmatic. So you've got the aspects of like treasury that really needs to move money to make sure from a liquidity standpoint, it's almost like a load balancing. We need to make sure money is there when we need it, that it's happening correctly. It's happening in, from a corporate governance or with statutory reasons because they're doing business in different countries. And, all of those things are there for a reason. The AP team is all the money movement for vendors. We got to pay our bills. We got to pay our suppliers. And there's a whole different reason of governance around that. Like, are we paying the right bills? Are we paying too much money? Do we need to, look at a different vendor because, this is an inefficient way of how we're spending our money. So you've got these business reasons and this other very tactical reasons, all kind of around liquidity. And then this whole emergent operational means that needs to be programmatic of moving money. And so all of that is causing this gap to widen. And then over the last, 15, 20 years, it's, of course, like all of that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So the gap is getting filled, and there's companies that are making a really good living off of that because that gap needs to close with experience, with different, automated means, or just taking care of some of that heavy lift. And therefore, you got this massive ecosystem that's grown up now. So if you think about that ecosystem, it's been, in a lot of ways, it's been doing things because if the banks were tech companies, they would be doing that. They're not. And so it's sort of eating out of the bank's bowl from a transactional payment standpoint. And that's been kind of happening sort of, it's like a leaky bucket. It's just been flowing out for a long time. And the banks have kind of made peace with that. And all these companies now that's earning a living on the payment stack of transactional stack of revenue that normally used to always be for the bank, and now it's shared, and there's now a wholesale stack. So, but now that all of those companies have been doing that to the bank, and now you have this thing called APIs and the bank's payment rails that are being now accessible, and now the game can change materially, and that's kind of what we're right on the cusp of.